Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Deb Bryant, Marketing Manager here at Avada. Thank you for tuning in today to this on-demand webcast in our cloud webinar series entitled Oracle ERP Editions That Work Better Together. Presenting today, we have Kevin Martin, our VP of Sales and Strategy, who will provide a brief introduction to Avada, and Thomas Zarzicki, Practice Lead for Cloud ERP, will follow up with the presentation. And now I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Deb, for the introduction. I'm Kevin Martin, Vice President of Solutions with Avada. Avada is a full-service Oracle partner and consultancy firm that provides services from strategic consulting to implementations for Oracle's on-prem and cloud-based applications. We also have expanded our expertise to provide full ERP, enterprise resource planning capabilities, covering financials, procurement, manufacturing, and order to cash, along with the supply chain management activities. Additionally, PLM offers the ability to bring in product data hub, innovation management, and product development applications. Our typical clients have revenues ranging from 20 million to 70 billion and are spread across all industries and pillars. They know to partner with Avada to improve their business processes, be it with supply chain, business process automation, or consolidate a single source of truth across ERP and ancillary systems. We help them implement any supply chain, ERP, PLM, or enterprise performance management application while providing business process automation, road mapping, and management consultancy across these applications. We offer a wide range of tools and solutions across many industries and verticals. Avada's eLink platform was developed to integrate legacy data between clients' data silos, third-party applications, or legacy ERP systems like JD Edwards, NetSuite, or SAP, and the Oracle Cloud infrastructure. Our Express solutions are designed to provide a faster implementation or pre-built platform for you to establish a cloud presence. We have also built several solutions that augment the cloud functionality specific to our clients' needs that improve productivity or automate tasks. As Oracle continues to incorporate AI, machine learning, or robotic process automation, we will leverage these into our solutions and implementations. Lastly, we work to our Avada advantage. Simply put, we are not successful unless our customers are successful. Our people come primarily from industry, offering deep experience and suggestions during the engagement. Together with the solutions we described earlier, our mantra truly is where strategy meets execution. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Thomas Zarzicki, who will share thoughts on being what we call better together, how leveraging multiple applications and pillars within the Oracle infrastructure like ERP and SCM, or EPM and SCM, builds on a powerful solution for your business. Thomas leads our ERP practice here at Avada and has a wealth of information coming from both industry and consulting. Thomas?
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. A very warm welcome to everybody attending the webinar today. This material is a part of a broader content where we at Avada are discussing various aspects related to defining a roadmap to Cloud ERP. And specifically today, we're going to focus on the first two blocks, the readiness assessment and implementation strategy, in the context of Cloud ERP implementation planning, and more specifically, in the context of identifying adequate additions to planned Cloud ERP Scope implementation. Specifically, we would want to establish methods and aspects of implementation that would help us define whether Cloud ERP Scope that we have defined is adequate, and more specifically, whether certain additions of supply planning and enterprise performance management functionalities could help with automating business processes within Cloud ERP proper. We're going to show few examples where additions of supply chain planning or EPM to Cloud ERP based on our previous projects and implementation would definitely add business value. And we are also going to discuss how those automation opportunities could be prioritized so that we end up with a realistic and relevant scope of a project. So we thought we could perhaps start with asking, when looking at Cloud ERP implementation and validating the scope, we should perhaps start with asking a few fundamental questions. So first one is fairly basic. For our clients, we first look whether the movement of physical materials, goods, raw materials is critical for business operations. And obviously, most of our clients with complex and extensive supply chain would answer yes to first two questions. And then the next question would be whether supply chain execution, supply chain planning, enterprise performance management modules are in scope. So if the answer to the first two questions is yes, so we have a supply chain heavy organization, but we don't have exact clarity on which supply chain execution planning EPM modules should be involved in scope, then the next thing that we would want to find out is to ask or further define what potential implementation areas could be involved. And on the right-hand side, we have a sample of questions that are typically asked. So for example, we would want to see how changes in finished goods and product demand between product segments, how are they realized and illustrated in company's financial forecasts? How the company responds to increase or decrease in demand? How in the planned Cloud ERP implementation we recognize impact of economic cycles on company operations and on the supply chain. For companies with a complex supply chain operations, typical scenarios like plant or supplier shutdown, whether planned or unplanned, and therefore changes in supply capacity or raw material availability. How are those recognized in financial forecasts? The next thing to look at would be, how the mandates for increased stock levels or maybe demands for more redundant supply chain are realized in our Cloud ERP implementations. And the reasons why we ask those questions is that in our experience, typically Cloud ERP implementation on many occasions is looked at in a very, very narrow sense. So more core financials, supply chain execution. By asking the questions that we have on the right-hand side, we have first indication that there may be benefit in expanding that Cloud ERP scope by adding supply chain planning EPM components. And there's one more reason for asking those questions. We believe that any Cloud ERP implementation, because of its impact, it changes almost everything that an organization does. It needs to be put in a strategic context. And we know that, especially now, with market supply availability uncertainties, what we try to illustrate on the left-hand side of the diagram, if Cloud ERP implementation is not put in the broad context right? So rapid changes in demand supply, global supply chain and partner network shifts, and increased demand for automation and partner interconnectivity. If we don't have a holistic, strategic, operational, and transactional view of what exactly is our cloud ERP implementation addressing, with that or without those questions being asked, our ERP scope definition, what exactly we are implementing out of the wide array of cloud, Oracle Cloud functionalities, we may not have enough, or the selection of the features that we initially thought of may not be adequate. And for example, if the geographical expansion and need for less fragile supply chain, or balancing between capital and cash requirements versus looking at what we need to continue research and development efforts, if that's the strategic context for cloud ERP implementation, but the scope is fairly narrow, then our immediate intuition should be that maybe addition of EPM modules to help with that constant monitoring, the continuous planning and ability to react to changing business context assessment. Maybe additional VPM modules to ERP makes sense. That's illustrated in the top chevron on the right-hand side. On the operational level, for example, the instant view into product profitability, or answering a question on the right most profitable balance between manufacturing things in-house, or maybe involving contract manufacturing organizations in our supply chain, and how that shift would impact profitability of the enterprise. If those are the right operational factors, then once again, addition of supply chain planning capabilities would be our first intuition. Same with at the transactional level at the bottom of the diagram, with need of full product material tracking, genealogy, or automated sourcing, supply compliance checks, and onboarding. If those are the primary factors or desires, requirements for cloud ERP implementation, then once again, the first intuition would be to look at potential additional supply chain planning components to ERP. So what are the benefits of those integrated solutions that beyond core ERP would involve additional supply chain planning and enterprise performance management components? What we wanted to illustrate on the slide here is exactly what are the automation opportunities by adding those additional components to ERP. And that's the middle column. On the right-hand side, conversely, we wanted to very, very clearly state what we possibly could be missing when implementing just ERP in the context or with those additional requirements or features that we provided as examples on the previous slide. And for example, if we add, that's the first row from the top, if we add supply chain planning to cloud ERP, instantly we are able to look at automation opportunities for processes like inventory replenishment. We have a better view on product availability. We have better ability to optimize inventory, stock levels. What we would be missing if we just implement cloud ERP, but we don't add relevant scope of supply chain planning, we would end up with, and we've seen examples in the past of organizations that went through or had gone through a substantial effort of implementing cloud ERP, but the features in Cloud ERP remained fairly manual. We are providing here an example of procurement sourcing being fairly manual if those supply chain planning features are missing. Typical requirement or expectation, desires to have better control over inventory cost. That's one of the typical requirements for Cloud ERP implementation. And our point here is it's fairly simple. Without minimum scope of supply chain planning addition to your Cloud ERP scope, you may not have full control and ability to control your inventory cost. And for EPM addition to your Cloud ERP, the common pattern here is that you'd be able to automate financial planning based on real-time inputs from supply chain. So being able to merge operational and financial aspects of planning process, expressing the supply chain forecast in the language of CFO, in the language of forecasted financial statements. And then finally, I think the biggest argument in looking at a wide scope that involves relevant features on both ERP supply chain planning and EPM side is the fact that once we look beyond ERP and add those additional components on the SCP EPM side, we take probably the greatest advantage of running Oracle Cloud Platform, which is having an integrated data model for all events that are taking place in the enterprise, and with that, ability to automate business processes. The other way to look at potential gaps and answering the first question that we posed, which is Cloud ERP enough? Another way to look at it in the Cloud ERP project planning activity is to look at the end-to-end processes coverage. So for an enterprise, it would start with intellectual property build-up, the designing and planning for new products, running research and development function. And typically what we would see is if we are lacking the coverage of research and development, also from the standpoint of funding, sometimes grants tracking, if we lack the integrated business planning capacity, starting from the moment that we plan a new product, new item. So if the ERP is missing the supply chain planning, product life cycle management components, that part of the process is once again manual, and all the aspects of executing supply chain down the road, downstream, are affected. Process number two, so capacity build out. For those clients where the shift in supply chain is occurring, or there is a significant element of infrastructure or capital intense project build out, we would typically see that not having project portfolio management addition would result in inability to automate work in progress, asset capitalization elements downstream. And if capacity build out results in billing events, not having that PPM component within Cloud ERP scope, doesn't necessarily automate the billing part. So the fact that we have receivables within Cloud ERP proper does not necessarily lead to process automation. Moving down to execution and backend automation, the common pattern here once again is that with increased or extended scope, we are able to properly feed supply chain execution modules, manufacturing. We are able to automate sourcing processes. And at the ends of the process, so on the back-end side, we are able to automate the generation of proper accounting entries and then aggregation of those and proper financial reporting and cost management. With that, let's briefly highlight, some of the features that would be available to us with increased scope for each of the process components. A good example for IP build-out is that if we have supply chain planning, product lifecycle management components in scope, we are able to cover all product lifecycle stages and define not only work structures, bill of materials, but all the aspects of making a new item, making a new product, including quality. And the research and development effort can then be properly recognized from the integrated business planning standpoint. On the capacity build-out side, not having the addition of project portfolio management, project financials components would result in manual tracking of the project financial health and manual asset capitalizations if those are infrastructural capital build-up projects. So this is an example of how adding PPM to core ERP would automate both assets and billing processes. Fairly obvious example with adding supply chain planning to core ERP and supply chain management is the fact that we get a lot serial number visibility to all aspects of supply chain planning, including supplier collaboration, product genealogy. Would be good addition for those projects or those organizations that because of regulatory or compliance reasons would need that end-to-end tracking, conformance compliance requirements for onboarding new suppliers and so forth. And then lastly, for backend automation, the key remark here is that typically that expanded scope, so adding components of PPM, EPM, would allow us to not only automate business processes, but immediately aggregate all financial results at the enterprise level. And how we go about the exact determination of what's needed, this is just an example from one of our post projects where we would grade particular requirements in every area from global finance through supply chain execution to capital intense projects, for example, and assess how those functions are realized in the current state. That's in the column in the middle. And then for each of the requirements, we would tie them again to that strategic context that we talked about earlier, and grade it. How important would that capability be from the standpoint of meeting those changing enterprise environment standpoint? And for those that are important, that's grade high on our matrix. We would then answer a question of whether we need additional components or additions to Cloud ERP Scope, and that is done in the column on the right hand side. From that assessment, we would then highlight which features beyond Cloud ERP or core finance scope would be relevant to be added. And finally, We would also ask a question whether it's possible to implement or involve those additional supply chain planning features as part of the complete cloud ERP rollout, or maybe it would make more sense, to pick specific processes where the synergies between supply chain planning and ERP are more prominent, or even start with a selected set of functionalities instead of implementing the whole ERP, SCM, PPM, and supply chain planning package. So with that, the key points and the key takeaways is that for us, the question on having adequate cloud ERP scope and asking whether there are components in supply chain planning suites that may increase automation, we think that this question is crucial and needs to be asked even before starting the cloud ERP journey, because most of the time, addition of supply chain planning EPM features to your cloud ERP scope would result in increasing the level of automation and the target state of business processes. And the common misconception or misunderstanding is that the cloud ERP alone by itself would result in greater process automation or meeting strategic business objectives. For most of the supply chain heavy organizations, we have consistently seen that those objectives were met only with an expanded scope, so ERP, supply chain planning, and enterprise performance management. So if we identify that, the business integrations, the intersection between ERP and other functional areas is lacking because it requires human intervention, and automation of those intersections is important to us, then that's the last point. It is important to come up and use an organized and structured approach to balance the necessary implementation effort and its ultimate outcome. Not everything, not every feature, and not every single module within Cloud ERP, SCP, and EPM needs to be implemented at first. Better an informed decision that would lead to, a determination of what exactly we want to implement, in what manner, big bang or staged, at what pace. And with that, I'm going to hand over the webinar to Deb, my colleague, who's going to talk about how it exactly can be done through the free cloud readiness consultation that is part of Avada offering. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Thomas. Before closing, I wanted to let you know that Avada does offer a free cloud readiness consultation if you're interested in cloud or additions to your ERP, but you're not sure where to start. You can contact us at connect@avada.com or visit our website, avada.com/cloud-roadmap, to learn more. We also have many other on-demand webinars, case studies, white papers, and demos that you can access by going to the Resources tab when you visit our website. On behalf of all of us here at Avada, we thank you for tuning in, and we invite you to connect with us if you have questions about the content presented today. Please follow us on social media to stay informed on our upcoming webinars and events, and I hope you all stay well and enjoy the remainder of your day.